Last time we talked about the Colt Walker, powerhouse of a gun that had some issues. This time we're going to talk about how Colt resolved those issues with the Colt Dragoon. Welcome back to episode 3 of the Histories of the Handgun of Colt. In our last episode, we talked about the Walker, and as I said before, it was a very powerful gun, but it had some issues. Number 1 issue being this loading lever constantly coming down under recoil. Number 2 issue being the cylinder being so large it could contain 60 grains of black powder, which often led to explosions and the cylinders bursting under the pressure. Another reason this could have happened, and I didn't mention in that video, was the idea that this was the first revolver to use a pointed bullet. It didn't have a heel. It was called a sugarloaf bullet. Had no heel, and you would load it in this spot here instead of a ball. And being as it had no heel on it, it was very difficult to get the bullet level in the cylinder. And so what a lot of guys did, or at least a few, was to remedy this, they simply turned the bullet around and loaded it nose first so that it would set square in the cylinder. You could ram it down, but that created a lot of pressure. Now, I don't think that a lot of people did that because they're not stupid, but probably 1 or 2 people tried it, and that resulted in some catastrophic failure of exploded cylinders. That creates a giant pressure spike. So the Mexican-American War is over. Samuel Walker's dead. But Colt has this Walker out. 1,000 guns to the military. 100 guns on the civilian market. And they're doing really well as far as their reputation. Even though they supposedly all broke down or blew up, you know, a lot of people still like these guns. And he's got a good reputation. He makes a complete break with Eli Whitney III, or Eli Whitney Jr. Some people call him this, some people call him that. Eli Whitney Jr. is the man who invented the cotton gin. Eli Whitney III, also called Eli Whitney Jr., is the man who helped make the Colt Walkers. Just to clear that up. Anyway, Colt decides to leave Whitneyville and start out with his own factory, which was his intention to start with, and through a little, shall we call it, chicanery, winds up with the equipment to make these big Walker handguns. The United States government orders 1,000 more Walkers in July 1st of 1847, and Samuel Colt is ready to make his own. But when they get there, in June of 1848, they're not exactly like the Walkers. He's made some improvements. First thing he's done is to shorten the cylinder. So in 1848, Samuel Colt moves to his own factory in Pearl Street in Hartford, Connecticut. The very first thing he does is to remedy the Walker's exploding cylinder issue. That would be the first thing you would think he would remedy. What you see here on your left, my right, is a Walker cylinder. It's big. This is the Dragoon cylinder. What he did was, the very first thing was, he took this cylinder and he cut 1/4 of an inch off to make it where you cannot load 60 grains of black powder. The standard load for this Dragoon cylinder is now 40 grains of black powder, which is still plenty powerful enough to do what needs to be done. Now this allowed for two things. Like I said, first of all, it was to reduce the powder charge, but the second thing he did, this is a Walker barrel assembly. This is the Walker forcing cone. Now, as you'll recall on the Patterson video, it has no forcing cone. This Walker has a small forcing cone. But by shortening the cylinder and using the same frame, Colt is now able to, on the Dragoon, put a large, nearly half-inch forcing cone on there. Just for comparison, this is a Walker barrel assembly. It has a very small forcing cone. But by taking that 1/4 of an inch off the Dragoon cylinder, he is able to make a large forcing cone that is over 1/2 inch in length and even wider in diameter, making for a very safe gun to shoot. And it also allows for better black powder fouling because the cylinder is much further away from the breech face down below. Another thing that is a difference on the Colt Dragoon is the wedge. Now, I don't know why, but for some reason, the Colt Walker, the wedge drives in right to left. Even the Patterson goes left to right. But he remedied that and went back to the Patterson style in the Dragoon with this wedge driving left to right. So they're opposites. Another thing, in order to lighten the gun, was to take the barrel and cut it from 9 inches to 7.5, which is still a very good length for carrying in a saddle holster. The most notable difference most people notice between the Dragoon and the Walker is the loading lever end. This is a Walker loading lever. It has an issue of falling down under recoil. Not so much with 40 grains, but if you're shooting the 50 and 60 grain loads, when the gun starts to kick, that will fall down. The thing about it is this T-spring, which was in Colt's original design, was not strong enough. What happens is this little hump right here, when you push the loading lever up, the spring comes back and then latches into place. Under recoil, that'll fall just about every time. There are things you can do. You can flatten the top of that on these modern replicas, but that was a problem back in the day. And how they remedied this situation back in the day, the Mexican-American War, was to take a piece of leather and tie it around and hold it up, and it's just wasn't a good thing, and many people complained, and Colt fixed it, kind of. This is the Dragoon loading lever. This is very common for first, second models, and some third models. The loading lever latch is a single upright lip on a spring-loaded catch with a groove cut here. Now what that allows for is a much more positive, you hear it right there, lock. The trouble is, it's still not enough. This loading lever, if you get anywhere above 30 grains of black powder, will still, under recoil, generally hop out and fall. And you'll see that in the shooting segment. But it's still better than the Dragoon, and if you stay with a light enough charge, it won't do it. Those are the main differences between the Walkers and the Dragoon. Now, the first Colt Dragoons had a lot of similarities with the Walkers. These are called the Model 1 Dragoons. And this is a Walker stripped down. See this, what they call the hammer spring here. It's long, it hooks to the foregrip right there, goes around, has a heavy-duty hook right here that simply hooks up under a groove in the hammer. And how that operates is, let me show you, it simply puts pressure upward on the hammer. When you pull the trigger, it stays caught under that groove in any position. The trouble is, this super sharp bend right here had a tendency to break. But Colt kept this on his first model Dragoon. Alright, this is a Walker cylinder. And the first model Dragoons were very similar in that, if you will take notice of the cylinder stop notch, it's round or oval with no key lead in. Also, there are no safety pins, hence you can only safely carry this loaded with 5. Those are the distinctions of the Walker and the first model Dragoon. The only true noticeable differences are in the barrel assembly, the shorter cylinder, and the overall length of the gun. Another thing that the first model Dragoon retained from the Walker was the square back trigger guard. Now, the first model Dragoon was made from 1848 until 1850, with just over 7,000 guns being made in the range of the first model Dragoon. Now, we move on to the second model Dragoon. Now, moving on to the second model Dragoon. This model is made from 1850 to 1851. And a very small number, less than 2,000 of these were made. The difference between the second and the first model Dragoon is, number one, the cylinder stop notches. If you'll notice here, instead of the round oval notches we had before, these are square, rectangular, with a key lead in, so it's called. This is the best way to do it, and this is also the way Colt would make all the rest of revolvers for eternity. Another thing, if you'll notice up here at the top of the cylinder, on the second model, we now have safety stop notches, meaning you can load all 6 and carry it safely. Later in the production run of the second model Dragoon, sometime in 1851, Colt went away from this hammer spring style here, which is overly complicated, to a much cheaper and easier to make standard. You see, this hammer spring simply starts at the base of the foregrip, comes up, and latches under the hammer. Also around this time, they would add a roller under the hammer right here, making this a very smooth, very simple spring system. Much cheaper to produce than the Walkers and first models. Most people today will agree the differences between the second and third model are simply square back trigger guard on the second model, rounded trigger guard on the third model. Another advantage that the Dragoon had over the Patterson pistol was that the Patterson, if you'll see in this picture here, has 17 moving internal parts in the action. The Dragoon, that you can see in this picture, has only 7. On November 6th of 1850, the Dragoon would be tested by the military, where they would fire 1,200 shots without breakage or stoppage. This simplicity also made it cheaper to produce, with the Dragoon selling for $25 per gun, where the Walker sold for $28. This is mostly due to the simplicity of this action. Colt would roll engrave his cylinders with complex battle scenes such as this one pictured here, so that no other gun shop could copy his work. Here we see a company of mounted Dragoons in a battle with Comanche Indians, with one brave hanging over the side of his pony firing under his pony's neck, while the Dragoons fire at him with their Colt revolvers. The Indians seem to be getting the short end of the stick in this fight. Alright, so this brings us to our gun we have here today on the table. This is the Uberti 3rd model Dragoon replica. Of all Dragoon models, number 3 is the most prominent, being made from 1851 to 1860. But all production of all three models of Dragoon number right around 20,000, which is 15,000 more than the Patterson and 19,000 more, well, basically 19,000 more than the Walker. A lot of people will give John Wayne a hard time in the 1969 film True Grit when Matty Ross holds up a Walker and says, "I have my dad's pistol," and John Wayne says, "Why, that's a Colt's Dragoon."
Well, if I had a big horse pistol like that, I wouldn't be scared of no booger man.
I'm not scared of no booger man.
And many armchair quarterbacks sitting at home will say, "Well, that's not a Dragoon, that's a Walker." And they're right, but bear in mind, there were only 1,000 Marshall Walkers made and 100 are sold to civilians. And of those 1,000 guns, supposedly 900 of them, or right around there, were rendered inoperable by the end of the Mexican-American War. The idea that a Missouri bushwhacker in 1872 would not know the difference between a Dragoon and a Walker is very plausible because they look a lot alike. In 1955, I believe it was, when a man found a Walker at a farmhouse a family had owned, and he was going to buy it, and it was the Walker E Company 120, which sold recently for an astronomical amount of money. He was trying to buy it from them, and they constantly reference this gun as the Dragoon. The family does, even in the papers and the recordings of the time. He, of course, told them it was a Walker and it was worth a lot more money. But almost everyone at the time would have called a Walker a Dragoon, just to clear that up. Now, the reason that the Walker and the Dragoon are known as horse pistols is because of their size. They're too heavy, really, to practically carry on your belt. Although it can be done, you wouldn't want to do it all day, every day, especially with a brace of them. The reason they're so large is because of the technology of the day. These guns, the original contracts called for the barrel and the cylinder to be made out of hammered cast steel. Not iron, but hammered cast steel, which, although stronger than iron, is still not strong enough to hold up to the high pressures that even black powder can produce when loaded heavy. So the only way to get the amount of power they wanted out of these guns at the time was to beef up that product to make the barrels and the cylinders just heavy, so that they wouldn't explode upon firing. This gun gets into production, and it's very popular with the western frontier, and this time not just with Texas. This time, this thing goes all over the West. The United States military buys a good portion of the 20,000 that were originally made, because, once again, when you're fighting with a few men fighting a larger group of Indians or something, one man wrote and actually said that the heavy Dragoon pistol of the time, the flintlock or the caplock or the Aston pistol, was literally as handy in a fight as a rock. And I'm not just making that up. That is a quote used in a Senate hearing. And the differences are, these guns have rifling, whereas most of those guns at the time didn't. What you were looking at the time, and this one actually has rifling, is a gun like this. Now, this is not a exact replica of any one kind of firearm at the time. This is just a CVA cap lock, a cheap cap lock CVA, but it's the style is generally the same. And what you do with this gun is you would place it on half cock, pour powder down the barrel, put a ball down the barrel, ram the ball home with this ramrod, replace your ramrod, put it back to full cock, place a cap on the nipple, and you were ready to fire. Now, most of this style of gun were smooth bore, and all they really were was an extra musket shot that was not rifled, that was basically less likely to hit anything even than your smooth bore musket. All they really were, a lot of people considered them basically battle clubs. Whereas this, we have 6 shots and a rifled barrel. Now, this gun, although not probably a 100-yard gun, as some people might claim, at 50 yards you should be able to kill a man with every shot from this gun. It has what they call gain rifling. And this is something Colt started in 1849, and all of his longer barrel pistols would have gain rifling clear up until 1873. Now, what gain rifling is rifling that for most of the barrel is almost completely straight. And then at the very end, it puts a very fast twist on the ball. The reason this is because when you shoot a ball into a very tightly rifled barrel, and the rifling starts right here after the forcing cone, a lot of times a soft lead ball will strip out in the rifling and just fly straight without even spinning. The gain rifling in these was something that was used in marksmanship sporting rifles of the time, and Colt thought that it would be a good idea to put this gain rifling in his pistols. This 1891 Carcano carbine also has gain rifling, and according to my brother, the Italians really thought they were on to something new when they came out with this. Little did they know that for at least 40 years, Colt had been making gain rifling in his pistols and other companies for at least 40 years prior to that. Alright, now let's get on to this gun and some of its uses. Of course, it was a military gun, but at the time, other than the Comanche Indians and the Indian Wars that were going on, between 1849 1850, not a lot is happening militarily in the United States. Out west, Texas Rangers are using this gun to great effect. Everybody's using this gun to great effect. The Western migration is on full force. People are on the Oregon Trail in the 1840s. This gun is making its name out there. Now, there is a record in 1855 of some people in Johnson County, Kansas, stating that one William Hickok could take his Dragoon pistol, he was a young man in his teens, and shoot an oyster shell at 100 yards. To make a shot of this kind in 1855 with a revolver was enough of a notoriety that it actually made a local Kansas City newspaper. Of course, William Hickok was just an alias for James Butler Hickok, a man that we will talk in great length about in a future episode. William Hickok carried a Dragoon, according to sources, from 1855 to 1861. He was a wagon master on a trail on the Santa Fe Trail, and he was driving a wagon in 1860 from Independence, Missouri to Santa Fe, and somewhere along southern Kansas, northern Oklahoma border, he ran into a cinnamon bear. Now, this cinnamon bear spooked the horses and wouldn't get out of the road because on the other side of his wagon was the cinnamon bear's cubs. Sources say that William Hickok, James Butler Hickok, soon to be known as Wild Bill Hickok, came off the wagon, drew his Dragoon pistol, and fired at the bear, striking it in the head. Now, if it was anyone else, I would question that whether he missed the bear or struck it in the head. But they say that he hit the bear in the head and the ball bounced off. I believe it because Bill Hickok could hit anything he shot at when he felt like it. That was proven later on over and over and over again, sometimes to his own detriment. And it bounced off the bear's head. This angered the cinnamon bear, who charged him, crushing him under his weight. He got off another shot with his Dragoon right through the bear's paw. After the bear was on top of him, it badly mauled his left shoulder and crushed all his ribs. He was able to get his Bowie knife out and slice the bear's throat. That was the only thing that saved his life. He would be bedridden for 4 months after this, and eventually wind up at a place called McCandle Station, which we'll get into in another episode, where he would make a name for himself as a gunfighter. But at the time, he basically after that put his Dragoon away. He carried it a little bit, but I think he thought that if he was going to go after a bear next time, he would use a rifle, because even though this thing is powerful, at the distance he was shooting, it was not powerful enough to take care of that bear. Now, this pistol belongs to my brother, and he takes it to Colorado when he goes fishing for bear protection. After reading this story, I'm going to strongly suggest to him that he move up to a .44 Magnum, because evidently 40 grains of powder in a round ball is not enough to stop even a cinnamon bear. Now, let's take this pistol out and let's shoot it. Let's load it up. First, place the Dragoon on half cock, freeing the cylinder. Next, we will measure out 40 grains of 3F black powder. Now, we will pour the black powder into the chamber. Next, we will cover the powder with a lubricated felt wad. This is an ox yoke wonder wad, and you can buy them from trackofthewolf.com. Next, we use a lead round ball. This one is home cast, so it has what is called a sprue. We load the sprue to the top. When loading the round ball, make sure that you cut a clean ring of lead. This will prevent sparks from getting by and causing a chain fire. Now we're going to cap it using Remington number 10 caps. After we've capped all 6, place the hammer down between the chambers on the safety pin, making it safe to carry. The Colt Dragoon was originally loaded with loose powder and ball, but problems with flasks not throwing a consistent charge led to the development of a paper cartridge in 1850. These simple paper cartridges were used in much the same way as the musket cartridge of the time, by tearing away the paper from the base, dumping the measured powder into the cylinder, and then removing the ball from the tissue paper and loading it. Later in 1855, they would be changed to look like this, with no tissue paper. The paper cartridges pictured here were made by Mark Hubbs from the channel Era's Gone Bullet Molds. If you are interested in paper cartridge development, check out his channel. The Dragoon was heavily used by both sides in the early years of the Civil War because the new 1860 Army would not be adopted by the North until later in 1861. Loading lever still comes down. That was a 40 grain charge. Not too bad. A little bit of cap here. Smaller bottle. We're not doing too bad today. Let's see if we can reach out to that big milk jug out there. Still pretty potent firepower, and we have a cap gun. I'll be back with you momentarily. Alright, we're going down to a 30 grain charge, just to see if that'll stop that loading lever from falling. Let's see how fast we can load this, wads and all. I'm not really worrying about, I'm trying to go fast, I'm not really worrying about sprue direction. And we're empty. No smoke. Ready? Compadre here cut his arm off in a trailer accident.
Yeah.
So
I lost my arm in a boating accident.
he's trying to learn how to shoot left-handed. Let me get a good side view here. Go. So there you have it, 30 grains, still drops the loading lever. shaky. You want me to shoot it?
I got it.
You can see me? Hi. As you notice, we had some problems. This gun is still notorious for cap jamming, and that loading lever with 40 grains of black powder and a round ball will still drop every time. Now, we're not the only one to notice this, because Colt noticed this. And later on in production, somewhere at the very end of the third model Dragoon, he went to a loading lever of this style. Alright, now this is our third model Dragoon, and if you'll notice this cylinder latch at the very end, the latch is a single prong coming out and interlocking with this lip. It is at the very top of the loading lever up here, and that really still causes some trouble with lowering under recoil. Now this is an 1861 Navy, and we'll get to it in another video. On this gun, the lip is extended below the loading lever, and there are two wings and a much stronger spring and a much deeper notch for that loading lever to go into. This gun, even though it can't hold 40 grains of powder, never drops its loading lever under 25 grains of black powder, and it's a lighter gun, so it recoils more. So that brings us to the end of our Colt Dragoon series. If you would like to see firing of replicas of the first and second model, I would suggest you go over to Duke Frazier Productions. He has a complete 3-video series on all 3 models made by Uberti, and they're very good guns, and he does a very good job with reviewing them. Now, this gun right here was very popular even after 1860, when it was replaced by the 1860 Army, which was a smaller, sleeker design, but still capable of being very powerful and being 44 caliber. But the fact that this could always hold at least 10 grains more powder than that gun made it remainingly popular on the western frontier for people who were worried about bears, which, as we discussed earlier, maybe that's not the option you should go to, but people that wanted just a little more oomph. There's enough oomph in this gun that there are reports of buffalo hunters riding up on buffalo and taking 4 or 5 shots to the head of the buffalo from extremely close range to put them down, and then killing them with other means if it didn't kill them with those shots. So it is very powerful. And it would continue in popularity up until, the 1870s. Even if they weren't making them anymore, a lot of people were still carrying them. And Colt really made a reputation on this gun. This was his first gun that sold more than 5,000 units. And he made a lot of money off this gun. And people liked this gun so much that they soon began asking for a smaller gun. And that's going to be our next episode. How Colt went to the gold mines, and how Colt really was a miner 49er, mining the miners, not the mines. Anyway, thanks for watching this episode. If you like this kind of content, please subscribe, because we're trying to make this channel get off the ground, and we're doing pretty well right now. But if you want us to keep doing this kind of thing, please like, share, and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.
And this way, bye-bye. Tell me you don't have beautiful more. And this way, bye-bye. We shall meet on that beautiful. Thank you for watching.